when control slipped through perfect hands. From the outside, everything looked flawless. The systems worked. The numbers climbed. The leadership structure appeared balanced, modern, untouchable. Yet somewhere between perfection and permanence, control began to slip, not through chaos or failure, but through refinement so precise it left no room for instinct. Power rarely vanishes in moments of crisis. More often, it fades during moments of success, when leaders believe they have finally engineered certainty. And in a world obsessed with optimization, this story matters because control is most vulnerable when it feels safest. The billionaire at the center of the story was known for precision. Every move calculated, every risk measured, every outcome anticipated. Their empire ran like a machine, efficient, admired, studied by competitors who hoped to replicate its perfection. The billionaire believed they had solved the problem that destroyed so many leaders before them: unpredictability. The reveal began with improvement. Processes were refined, decision trees mapped, authority distributed just enough to prevent bottlenecks. What once depended on instinct now relied on data. What once required bold judgment now passed through elegant frameworks. The billionaire approved each change personally, proud of the system taking shape. At first, the system amplified their influence. Results arrived faster. Fewer mistakes surfaced. Teams felt empowered. The billionaire became the architect of order, not just vision. Control didn't feel lost. It felt multiplied. But perfection has a hidden cost. As the system matured, it stopped asking questions. It didn't challenge assumptions. It didn't pause to sense shifts that data hadn't yet captured. It simply executed what it had been designed to do. And in doing so, it slowly removed the need for the one thing it couldn't replicate: human intuition. The first signs were easy to dismiss. A recommendation rejected because it didn't fit historical models. A bold idea deferred because risk thresholds weren't met. The billionaire noticed the resistance but trusted the structure. After all, the system was built to protect the company from emotional decisions. The irony was subtle. The system was protecting the company from its creator. The reveal sharpened during a critical planning cycle. The billionaire proposed a move that felt right, not because the data demanded it, but because experience did. The response was immediate and polite. The model didn't support it. The risk profile was misaligned. The framework advised caution. For the first time, the billionaire hesitated, not because they were wrong, but because the system had been trained to disagree. And in that hesitation, something irreversible began. Control didn't collapse. It slipped quietly, efficiently, perfectly. And the moment it passed through their hands, it never returned. The shift deepened as the system gained confidence. What began as a tool evolved into an authority. Meetings no longer revolved around judgment or debate, but around alignment with predefined metrics. Dashboards spoke louder than voices. Projections carried more weight than experience. The billionaire watched as decisions emerged already resolved before conversation even began. The reveal became impossible to ignore when long-standing instincts started to lose credibility. Suggestions rooted in years of pattern recognition were flagged as outliers. Warnings based on subtle market signals were dismissed as anecdotal. The system didn't argue. It simply ranked, filtered, and deprioritized anything that didn't fit its models. At first, the billionaire pushed back. They questioned assumptions, challenged thresholds, asked why certain risks were considered unacceptable now when similar risks had once created the empire. The responses were calm, technical, irrefutable on paper. The models showed stability. The probabilities looked solid. The margins appeared protected. Everything pointed toward restraint. And so the billionaire stepped back, just slightly. That step changed everything. Without resistance, the system accelerated. Committees deferred more decisions to automated analysis. Leaders learned how to speak in metrics rather than ideas. Creativity was reframed as optimization. Intuition was treated as bias. What couldn't be measured gradually stopped being considered. The conflict surfaced emotionally before it surfaced structurally. The billionaire felt a growing disconnect between responsibility and influence. They were still accountable for outcomes, still celebrated for success, still blamed for setbacks, yet increasingly absent from the decisions that produced them. The moment that sharpened the conflict came during a volatile market shift. External signals began flashing, not yet visible in quarterly data, but unmistakable to someone who had lived through cycles before. The billionaire urged preemptive movement. Speed mattered. Timing mattered. Waiting would cost position. The system advised patience. Models needed more data. Confidence intervals weren't breached. Historical comparisons suggested caution. The recommendation was unanimous. Wait. The billionaire waited. By the time the data confirmed the shift, competitors had already moved. Positions were lost. Opportunities vanished. The company remained stable, but smaller than it could have been. No one called it a failure. The reports framed it as risk avoidance. But the billionaire felt the truth settle in quietly. Control hadn't been stolen. It hadn't been challenged. It had been optimized out of existence. And the more perfect the system became, the less space there was for the one thing it could never replace. Judgment. The conflict was no longer theoretical. It was personal, and it was growing. The conflict intensified as the billionaire realized the system no longer needed them to function. What had once been a partnership between human judgment and analytical precision had tilted decisively toward automation. Decisions flowed smoothly, predictably, and without friction, but also without imagination. The empire had become efficient at maintaining itself, not at becoming something new. The breaking tension surfaced during a strategic retreat meant to chart the company's future. Executives arrived armed with models, forecasts, and optimization paths extending years ahead. Every scenario was mapped, every risk accounted for, every outcome simulated. The presentations were flawless and empty. The billionaire listened in silence, searching for something familiar, a sense of curiosity, urgency, danger, possibility. But the room spoke only in probabilities and safeguards. No one asked what the future could be, only what it was statistically likely to be. When the billionaire finally spoke, the response was immediate and revealing. Their proposal wasn't rejected outright. It was absorbed, dissected, and diluted until nothing bold remained. The system didn't say no. It said not necessary. That was the moment the billionaire understood the cost of perfection. By eliminating volatility, the system had eliminated vision. By removing risk, it had removed transformation. And by protecting the company from instinct, it had quietly removed the need for the person whose instincts built it. Emotionally, the realization cut deep. The billionaire wasn't being opposed. They were being rendered optional, a respected presence, a symbolic figure, someone consulted but no longer required. The tension escalated when a younger executive, raised entirely within the system, questioned why the billionaire's intuition should override the models at all. The question wasn't disrespectful. It was logical, and that was what made it devastating. The billionaires saw themselves reflected in the system's values, but frozen in an earlier version of reality. The empire had evolved past the kind of leadership that relied on feeling the future before it arrived. And yet, deep down, the billionaire knew something the system could not quantify. Every era-changing breakthrough they had ever led began as an anomaly. Every defining risk had once looked irrational. Every leap forward had violated the models of its time. The conflict reached its emotional peak when the billionaire realized the system would never choose greatness over certainty. It wasn't designed to. It couldn't be. The system wasn't broken. It was doing exactly what it was built to do, and that left the billionaire facing a painful truth. In perfect systems, control doesn't disappear in rebellion. It disappears in relevance. The next choice would determine whether the billionaire fought the machine they created, or found a different way to lead in a world ruled by optimization. The climax arrived in a moment of quiet honesty. The billionaires stopped trying to override the system the instant they understood it would never yield, not because it was wrong, but because it was complete. It had learned everything it was taught. It had absorbed every preference, every safeguard, every rule meant to eliminate uncertainty. And in doing so, it had surpassed its creator. So the billionaire made a decision that surprised everyone. They stepped out of the system, not in protest, not in anger, but in acceptance. In a final address to leadership, the billionaire acknowledged the truth aloud. The company no longer needed a single intuitive authority to guide it. It needed stability, predictability, and collective governance. And the system delivered that better than any individual ever could. Trying to reclaim control would only destabilize what had been so carefully optimized. Instead, the billionaire redefined their role. They withdrew from operational decision-making and became something else entirely, a scout of the unknown. While the system handled the present with precision, the billionaire turned outward, exploring futures the models could not yet see, long-term shifts, cultural undercurrents, human behavior before it became data, possibility before probability. The organization adjusted quickly. The system continued to operate flawlessly. Investors were reassured. Efficiency remained intact. And for the first time in years, the billionaire felt unburdened by the need to be right inside a structure that had no room for intuition. The resolution unfolded quietly. The company became a master of execution. The billionaire became a student of emergence. Control was no longer centralized. It was contextual. The system ruled the now. The human watched the horizon. And that was the final lesson of perfect hands. Control doesn't always slip because of weakness. Sometimes it slips because strength was encoded too well. And in a world built on optimization, the most powerful leaders are not those who fight the machine, but those who know when to step beyond it. Subscribe to join the journey. When